Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having me here. I understand I have a bit of a graveyard slot since all of you have just come back from lunch. So I've been told my job is to keep you awake. Are you guys awake? Very good. That's good. Let's see if you're still awake after 25 minutes, right? First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Russia is a fantastic market for us. We have about 2 engineering sites and a lot of people who work in the advertising area in Russia. So I was thinking last week, I was going to speak after about a day and a half of very, very smart people who were going to come here and give you a lot of interesting insights. So I relied on my favorite search engine, and I decided to do a search. And I said, what can I do for predictions? And when I clicked through looking on my mobile phone, I found this article in the Telegraph in the UK, which actually said that a gentleman called Nikola Tesla actually predicted the mobile internet in 1909. So I was very intrigued. I clicked on Google Books, and I found this original article from 1909 in Popular Mechanics, which said that this gentleman who basically found alternate, or just invented alternating current or discovered alternating current in electricity, he said that this is one of the innovations which is going to allow people to send pictures, texts, and messages to everybody else around the world. This was in 1909. So he predicted that we were going to live a wireless future about 100 years ago. He also had many other predictions like personal helicopters and flying cars, which haven't still quite materialized, but I thought this was very interesting. It was interesting that I found the article on my mobile phone. I was able to search for it on the web. I was able to find the original article on Google Books and be able to come share it with you over here. So why don't we see where we are in 2010. If you look at where we are in 2010, we have 1.8 billion people connected to the internet. Now, whilst that's still only about 26% of the world's population, it actually represents almost 90% of the world's GDP. We have 4.6 billion mobile subscribers, which means 2 out of every 3 people actually have a mobile phone, which is interesting. I was in India last week, and 50% of the people in India have mobile phones. Sad but true, only 1/3 of them have access to toilets or have toilets in their homes. So what's fascinating to watch is how quickly technology is becoming the underpinning of our society around the world. The other interesting fact is that we have 800 exabytes of digital information in the world. An exabyte is roughly about 40,000 hours of television viewing. Until about 2003, there were 5 exabytes of information in the world. Now we create 5 exabytes every 2 days. There's 800 exabytes. Every blog, every video that's uploaded on the web, every piece of text, every piece of audio that is created and put on the web, every Facebook page, all these things add up to 800 exabytes, and we seem to be generating them 5 exabytes every 2 days. So this is where we are. If you look at where we are in the world, from a pure media perspective, I think media is going online as well. So if you look at what's happening, about 2.5 billion photos are posted on Facebook every month. About 24 hours of video is uploaded every minute on YouTube. So you're beginning to see the trend. Media is going online. We are living in a connected world in the internet. We have a society which is getting more and more reliant on mobile devices. So I thought rather than come here and talk about the past, I'd try and see if we can do a Tesla over here. So I worked with my team. We tried to figure out what's going to happen 10 years from now. Since we already know where we are, we already know where we were 10 years ago with about 1.7% of the world being connected to the web, now about 26%. I said, let's see where we could be in 10 years from now. So if you think about where we are going to be in 2020, I have to rely on somebody to change the slides. I'm sure they're doing a great job. There we go. So I think in about another 10 years, we will have 5 billion people connected to the web. That should represent about 80% of the world's population. 1 gigabyte speeds will become normal. Korea is going to go to 1 gigabit per second in 2012. We are doing some trials in the US with 2 cities where we're trying to see how we can do a 1 gigabit trial. We actually ran a very interesting competition where cities were asked to bid and see why Google should do a test in their city. What was interesting is there was a city in Kansas which changed its name and called itself Topeka Google Kansas for the month, trying to woo us to come do the trial over there. But the more interesting part is the speed of the internet is going to become 500 times faster in the next 10 years. Now, why do I believe that? Why is that? Why do you think that is possible? If you think about it, I used to sell PCs in 1989. That PC was less powerful than the first mobile phone that I got in my life, which is 1997. In those 20 years, that PC has gone ahead and become 250 times faster. In the last 10 years, this PC has become 100 times faster. So if you believe that is true, if you can project that forward, it is very feasible to believe that internet speeds are going to go up 80 to 500 times depending on where you are in the world. So I think there's going to be about 5 billion internet users around the world. There'll be 10 billion mobile subscriptions. Now you wonder that the world's population is slightly over 6 billion people. How is it possible that we're going to have 10 billion mobile subscriptions? I think devices like the Kindle, devices like the iPad, all of us carrying multiple devices at any point in time is going to drive us to a point where we are going to end up with 10 billion mobile subscriptions. Perhaps our televisions, perhaps our refrigerators, they're all going to have some form of mobile connectivity where we can address them from anywhere in the world. What's even scarier is there's going to be about 53 zettabytes of data. This was a word which was introduced into the dictionary earlier this year. Because we're creating so much information at such pace that people don't have a word to describe a million exabytes. We're going to have 53 zettabytes of information in the world. I think we're going to have a problem. It's going to be very hard to figure out how to find the information that we need, how to make it relevant for us. Now, in that world where we are in 2020, if you look back from there, I still believe the internet and technology and the digital revolution is still just starting, right? We're at the very, very early stage of the internet. It may look like it's grown up, it may look like it's mature, but it's still at a very, very early stage. Let me take the example of advertising, since many of you or most of you work in the advertising industry. This is a piece of homework that you should go out and do. If the lights are on and I could actually poll the audience, I would ask the question to you. Television came about in 1949. Right? Let me see a show of hands. How many of you are involved in television advertising? All right, some of you, about 10, 15%. The first television ad was in 1959, 10 years later, or one of the first television ads. What's interesting is that television ad is an ad from Mattel Corporation with a Barbie doll. Now, many of you who have kids or who have girls, you understand what a Barbie doll is. That ad actually shows a man's hand holding the Barbie doll and making it dance to the jingle which used to be played on radio. Now, if you're in the television business, you would find that somewhat ridiculous. You'd say, oh my God, can they not understand that that is not the right kind of advertising for that media? That happened 10 years after the television came about. If you think about where we are in the internet era, we're about 10 years from the point of inflection where the internet started taking off. About 10 years ago, there were 1.7% of the people in the world connected to the internet. Now we have 26% of the world connected to the internet. So I still believe we are at a very adolescent stage of the internet. We are at a point where the internet is just starting. And it is nowhere reflected so truly as it is in the world of internet advertising. From my perspective, there are two very, very fundamental things that the internet does. One, it allows you interactivity, right? Most other forms of advertising do not allow you to interact with the ad right there. I can't press the newspaper and have it do something back at me. I still cannot press my television and have it do something back at me. However, when I see an ad on the internet, whether it is a video ad, whether it is a display ad, whether it is a search ad, I can actually pause the content I'm looking at and interact with that piece of advertising. And I don't think, as an industry, as an advertising industry, we have embraced this notion of the ability to interact with the end user, the ability to interact with the consumer. We have lived life so long in an age where we have been broadcasting to the user that the notion of interactivity has not fully set in our practices, has not fully set in our ways of advertising. The other thing which I would say about the internet is it also allows you a notion of mass personalization, i.e., you can actually show me a different ad from the person sitting next to me. Now, I'm not suggesting that when you do a Super Bowl ad in the United States or you do an ad in the middle of the World Cup soccer finals, that instead of 50 million people watching one ad, we have 50 million ads. I'm not suggesting we do 50 million ads. However, there's some very fundamental parameters which tell me the location, the time of day, or even a degree of affluence of the consumer or the gender of the consumer can allow me to tailor the ad a little better than having 50 million people watch the same ad. You don't want my grandmother and me watching the same ad. Probably not the right ad that can target both of us. So if you believe that's true, that's the second part which I don't think the advertising industry has still fully embraced, is that this level of interactivity, this level of mass personalization that is going to be heralded by this digital revolution is something that we're all ready for. We're not. We're still in the adolescent stage of the internet. We're still in the early stages of getting the advertising industry to adapt to these changes which the internet is going to herald. So let's see, where are the big bets that we can take going forward? From my perspective, there are 5 bets which I'd like to leave in front of you. The first one is the bet that we're going to be dealing with infinite scale. And I'll come back to each one of these. And by infinite scale, I mean with 5 billion people connected to the web, with 10 billion mobile subscriptions, this is scale. This is serious scale. I did an interesting thought experiment, and again, I wish the audience, I could interact with you guys more than with these lights. But if you remember the last global brand, yell out to me, what is the last global brand that was built? Coca-Cola, all right? Going once. Apple, Google, Nokia, Nike, Danone. You guys are really traditional industries. What about Amazon, Facebook, YouTube? You guys believe those are brands still or no? Obama, there we go, yes. So that's an easier one, right? Okay, all right, now we're beginning to get heckled, so I'm not going to repeat what the last gentleman said. But my point is, if you look at the last 10 brands that were built globally, a majority of them have been brands which have been built on the internet. The Googles, the Apples, the Amazons, the eBays, the Facebooks, the YouTubes of the world. Which is an interesting thought experiment to some people's points. Other brands you remember are Nokia, Coca-Cola, IBM, Microsoft, General Electric. A lot of those traditional brands have taken 20 to 30 to 50 years to get built. A lot of the new internet brands have taken between 3 to 7 years to get built. And the point I'm trying to make is that with this notion of infinite scale, we're at a point where any business that is starting will have the opportunity to address 5 billion people on the internet, will have the opportunity to address 10 billion people who are mobile phones, and that is just phenomenal. I mean, in the past, if I wanted to be present in Russia, I would have to come open an office, have some people, have storefronts, sell my product, and that's how my brand would get built in the old traditional way, do a lot of television advertising. Today, I can launch an internet business or an internet service from some garage in California or a garage in the UK or somewhere in Luxembourg, wherever. And that brand can sort of be spread around the world using this notion of infinite scale that the internet is going to provide or is going to continue to provide to us in the next 10 years. If you look at the second, so what I also wanted to show, since you guys are doing this after lunch, I want to show you some examples which are very early nascent examples of what some of these brand building exercises have been. So let's see if we can get a video to work. We can get the video to work, we can't get the sound to work. Unfortunately, I cannot do what that guy is doing. Otherwise, I would have done it. As you can see, we're still at the nascent age of technology. We can't get it to work in conferences, so we will have this challenge. But anyway, this is a video about a guy called Lucas Cruikshank in the first one. He's a 15-year-old kid from Columbus, Nebraska. He created a TV series himself. He plays a 6-year-old kid in that TV series. He's created 54 3-minute episodes. Each episode gets about 6 to 10 million views, and 1.6 million people subscribe to his channel. So now he's selling advertising on his channel. The second video is of 2 kids that is the #1 video of all times. It has had 186 million views. 186 million is a big number, irrespective of whatever it is for, right? Good or bad. These two kids have 186 million people who have watched their video. They have a fan club, and they have a growing college fund, as well as they have a blog. The last example is of an Israeli musician and a DJ. He's created something called open source music. He's got 21 artists who collaborate on the internet, who work with each other. Again, the reason I'm showing you these examples is it works everywhere. It works in the advertising industry, it works in the content industry, it works in physical distribution of goods industry, it works in pretty much every industry, because there's another way to think about the internet. It is the world's largest information, communication, and distribution platform. If I want information now, I go to the internet. If I want to communicate to people, I go to the internet. If I want to go distribute a good or service, whether it's digital or whether it's physical, I go to the internet. The second big bet I want to leave you is the notion of relevance and choice. The notion of relevance and choice works like this. With 53 zettabytes of information, as I said, until 2003, the world had 5 exabytes of information. Now we're at a point where there's 53 zettabytes of information, right? Just imagine that scale. From that perspective, the challenge we're going to run into is not about not having information. The challenge we're going to have is having too much information. And that can be as bad a problem as having no information. In the past, information was power. If you come from societies, if you come from countries, if you come from religions which have been hierarchical, where the elitists always had more information, which translated into power, we all wanted access to information. The most fundamental thing, if you're a stock trader, if you were a real trader, you could get access to real-time information. If you were a casual investor, you had to wait for 15 minutes. Just that change, where we could all get real-time information, changed the stock trading activity in the world. Imagine that kind of phenomena working on any kind of information. So from that perspective, we're going to have lots and lots of information. If you have so much information, how are we as advertisers, how are we as business people going to find a way of creating that relevance and creating that choice for our consumers? How are we going to make sure that we as consumers find the right information? How are we going to make sure that we as advertisers create that relevance in the information, in the relevance in the advertising that we're showing to these consumers? So I have an interesting example of an ad which was done by Evian, where they made an internet ad. 23 million people chose to watch this ad, as opposed to it being thrust upon them. Again, I'm sorry I don't have sound. It's interesting, 23 million people chose to watch this ad, which is a very different example than us creating a television ad and broadcasting it to consumers. This is an example where users choose to interact with the advertising because it is relevant, because it is creative, because it allows them the choice to act. Now, what's interesting is when we do advertising on the web in video form, we can actually track how long the people watch the ad, where do they go off, do they watch it past 8 seconds, do they watch it for 15 seconds, do they engage with the brand, how interesting do they find the ad. So it's a very different way of dealing with the consumer, it's a very different way of engaging with the consumer, and it's a very different way of advertising to the consumer. Which brings me to my next issue, or next point, which is a big bet. I think we're going to eventually evolve to a market of one, right? Because in the end, the internet and the digital connectivity and the engagement I talked about and the mass personalization I talked about will allow us to be able to target or interact with one user at a time. As traditionally as brands, we're not used to interacting with one user at a time. We're used to bringing 20 into a room, putting white, bright lights on them, and forcing them to say, well, if I design my product like this, what do you think? And then we go back to our managers, we go back to our brand managers and say, I have consumer feedback. Now you get consumer feedback every second. There are 40% of the tweets on Twitter are about some brand or the other where the consumer is giving feedback. I was talking to the chief marketing officer of one of the large companies who was speaking here yesterday, a few weeks ago in California. And they're struggling with this notion. They're struggling with the idea, how do they get their brand managers to understand this interaction that goes on between all their users and their brand. Because in the past, we were used to very, very managed interaction. We would do a survey, we would do a study, people would figure out something, they would come back with lots of slides of PowerPoint with lots of data and say, here's what the consumer thinks, and that would take about 3 to 6 months after an ad was shown. Today, we can get instant feedback. And the instant feedback will tell you if you're engaging effectively with that market or one or not. So it's very important that we start understanding the notion of how we want to engage with that one consumer. How do we want to understand their feedback? Hopefully, I have, I had another video, but I'm told it's not going to work. So the video I was going to show you was about an interactive ad that was created by Sprint in the US. And the ad was about being able to upload a video and participate in the advertising with the firm. There was another example where Heinz Ketchup actually did an ad for the Super Bowl where they allowed their users to create the ad for them. They had 53,000 entries for one Super Bowl ad. And all the users felt that they were engaging with the advertising, they were being solicited, they were being understood, they were being represented. Let me take the fourth big bet. The fourth big bet, from my perspective, is we are going to a world of the adaptive web. And people ask me, is the web going to be on television? Is the web going to be on mobile? Is the web going to be on PC? And my point is, all these are purely screen sizes, and all these are purely circumstances where we choose to interact with the internet. I think the distinction between the offline world and the online world will go away. If you think about it, in the broadest sense, the internet is purely a mechanism for us to take our offline behaviors and interact or make them relevant in an online world. Social networking, it's like me and you standing by a water cooler and having a conversation. It is what we used to do in high school is now happening on the internet. Communication, where we would pass notes, write letters, we send emails. Us buying stuff is now called e-commerce. Earlier we used to go to a store. Today you buy it on Amazon, you buy it on eBay. So all the behaviors you see on the internet are actually a reflection of society that used to happen in an offline world is now happening in an online world. Us watching television, that's watching offline content, or if it comes through a broadband cable into your TV, does that make it online content? So my view is that in the next 5 to 8 years, you will see 40 to 50% of the content and the businesses move to this digital medium. And if that is true, if you believe that is going to happen in the next 5 to 8 years or 10 years, then I also believe that roughly a third to 40% of the advertising is going to move to the digital world. And the distinction is going to go away. You won't be talking about the offline world and the online world. You'll be talking about a combined world. You will see a television ad which will encourage you to go to the website and interact. You will see something on the website which will encourage you to interact with the brand, provide feedback. So I think this whole journey of customer engagement is going to happen in multiple ways, and we're going to live in a world of an adaptive web. I will take some applications with me when I'm on my mobile. I will take some applications with me when I'm on my PC. I will take some applications and interact with them when I'm interacting with my television. And hell, perhaps my refrigerator is going to interact with some application by itself, telling it how much food there is in it, and when I can turn it on, when I can turn it off. Today, my alarm system already interacts with me on the web. I can turn on and turn off my alarm in my house in California right now from my web, from my computer. So we're going to live in a very, very adaptive world. We are going to live in a world of technology where we're going to be stateless. It won't matter what device you're on, what device you're interacting with. We are going to interact with this cloud of information. Let's see if I can get the last video to work. This is just an application which is on an Android device, which basically takes the web and augments your real life on your phone. So that you're looking at things around you through the phone, and it actually layers on top of it saying, here's other pieces of information you should know. Here's what this store is selling. Here's what's in stock over here. Here's a coupon for this store. So it's a way of augmenting reality. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with from a big bet perspective is, again, this is not about numbers. This is not about data. This is not about a lot of the computing power we talk about. This is still a combination of science and art, which you guys practice in the advertising industry. However, the science is forcing the art to adapt. And what the science is telling you is that you no longer have to wait 6 months to get feedback. You can get instantaneous feedback. The science is telling you that it's important to incorporate that feedback because it allows you to engage in a more more cohesive, better process with the consumer. So it's fascinating to see how we at Google have adapted some of these principles to the way we work and the way we do our business. At Google, we don't wait for 1 year to launch a product. We run about 101% experiments every day. If you think about the scale and scope, there are about 4 or 5 billion searches a day that happen on various search engines around the world. 4 or 5 billion is a good number, right? If you could take 1% of that, which is 40 million, and you can test something with 40 million people or 40 million instances, you can get a pretty good idea of what that test is going to result in, so you can see whether you should apply that to the remaining 4.5 billion people or not. So we run about 101% tests every day, which gives us consumer feedback. That feedback allows us to apply art to it and decide whether that made sense or not. So this is a combination of science and art. There's a very interesting example where a mobile phone company in Europe is, I think, pioneering this. They're running search ads with us, and they're highlighting a feature of their mobile package every day, which is different. And they collect the data from the experiment over 10 days, and they try and see which features had more resonance with the consumers, which didn't. And then they design the television ad based on the search behavior, saying, these 5 features were very clicked on, people actually liked them, people interacted with them, these 5 they did not. So this must have an emotional interaction with the consumer. Let's take this and let's apply art to this and create a TV ad which engages our consumers basically. So there's lots of interesting different ways that you can apply science, you can apply art to the science that is being provided by the internet. So from our perspective, this is just the beginning. We're still in the early stages of the internet. However, I can promise you the one big impact of this internet, the one big impact of all these big bets is we are fast moving to what is a borderless world. We're moving to a place where things were designed for countries, things were designed for national borders, things were designed in a way that we could control them. We're going to, when somebody launches a business from Russia, somebody launches a business from Germany, somebody launches a business from Spain, they have the ability to interact with 1.8 billion people today. They will have the ability to interact with 5 billion people in the future. So we have to make sure we understand we are in a very disruptive phase of technology. And the fascinating part of technology and disruption, it leaves a lot of carcasses in its wake. A lot of businesses will have to adopt, a lot of industries will have to reform as we go through this technological revolution. And I think the important part at this point in time is not to hold back our imagination. I think in the words of Nabokov, genius is an African who dreams of snow. With that, thank you very much for listening.